So Vincent. This is a 1982 stop-motion short film directed by Tim Burton. He has other shorts that he made by himself that were, I think you can find some of them on YouTube, but this is sort of the first major one. There are two executives who he kind of warmed up to when he was an animator at Disney, and they actually gave him the money. So while he was working as an animator at Walt Disney, two Disney executives, Julie Hickson and the head of creative development, Tom Willith, liked Tim Burton and what he was doing and actually gave him $60,000 to produce an adaptation of this already written sort of poem thing. Tim Burton actually considered making this a children's short story book, and you can kind of tell based on the rhyming and stuff if you listen to the Vincent Price monologue. But this is his first thing, and it was a Disney thing. It does play, in my mind, like kind of a gothic kid's fantasy, and solely in that perspective. I think it really works, and Vincent Price, who does a great performance in this, and cool little trivia fact that I don't think enough people bring up, this came out as 1982, which is the same year, and I believe around the same time, Thriller came out, the album Thriller and the song. So interesting year for Vincent Price. He gets to work with Tim Burton and Michael Jackson. Or at least have those things come out. I'm curious what paid him more, but we don't need to get into that. Vincent Price does a great job kind of reading it and giving it a lot of life to it. He really liked working on this. He thought it was actually a little better than getting a star on the Walk of Fame. And he had a relationship with Tim Burton. They had a friendship till the end of his life. He was only in one other Tim Burton thing, I believe, which was the beginning of Edward Scissorhands. I have no clue why he didn't put him in other stuff, because it does seem like you really like Vincent Price. But it's basically about a little kid who wants to be Vincent Price and is obsessed with sort of these gothic movies, especially the ideas of Vincent Price horror movies. And it kind of plays like a good Calvin and Hobbes strip where his imagination takes wild and stuff, to the point where I think I saw this before. I'm not sure. The availability of this film is weird. I'll get into that. But his ending part where he's fully into his weird goth fantasy, when I was a kid, just played a kid being dramatic, and I think I took it a little more seriously. Now I'm like, well, that's funny. He's a kid who's super gothic and believes the world, the world's gonna end, and he has a wife who's dying, and it's so ridiculous. And Vincent Price plays it like the kid would want Vincent Price to read it, not as most people would read it as this kid's being silly, which I think adds an extra element to it. You're really in this kid's perspective, which I find really interesting. I do think Tim Burton really loves his perspective and stays in it so much he barely comes up for air. But this was kind of the beginning, literally the beginning of that. As much as we're talking about how the original Beetlejuice was, this is literally the beginning. It was shot in stark black and white in the style of German expressionist silent films like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. If you're a big Tim Burton fan, by the way, see the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It is so influential on his stuff. Really see that come out. People say you can see Jack Skellington's in here. I don't. Sort of, not really. You see other kind of characters. Remember for Christmas. This was done with Disney animator Rick Hendricks and stop motion animator Steven Chodo and cameraman Victor Abelov, I think, and Tim Burton. Not a huge crew. And I noticed it says designed, written, and directed by Tim Burton, but not animated by. I'm curious how much he did for that, or this other guy, the Steven guy, did more of it. But it creatively, it really, really works. It's a really fun little short. I was always more of a Frankenweenie kid, and I sort of remember seeing this on a Frankenweenie VHS, but it didn't have that. This doesn't get a lot of releases. There have been bootleg releases, and the only official ones that can be found on the 2008 special edition, collector's edition, or whatever, of Nightmare Before Christmas, and was as a bonus feature, and was on this thing, Cinema 16's DVD and American short films, but mostly it's in the Disney Vault. It is not on Disney Plus. I saw it on YouTube. I have no clue why you would not put this on Disney Plus, what their deal is with that. Is there a rights thing? Are they just being dicks? This is a nice introduction to Tim Burton. I think Frankenweenie was marketed a lot better. I'm surprised this isn't as available. I'm not exactly sure why you would want it to be unavailable. I guess because the Vincent Price, and he did work on another Vincent Price thing, which we'll talk about in my Tim Burton almost directed a documentary about him. But this is sort of the biggest thing he made with Tim Burton. It only played in one theater for 2 weeks before the movie Tex with Matt Dillon. That's probably the widest release it's ever gotten, other than being a bonus feature on a DVD. But sort of is just like interesting little studio short. And I think Tim Burton did a good job with it. I think you could probably still make this into a short story, Disney, but whatever. It's interesting to see where he came from and where it all kind of started, as this is pre-Frankenweenie. And I wish he'd go back to more of his Vincent Price stuff. I think, if he eventually released the documentary made on Vincent Price and put this on here, I think people would be down for that. And I think it's like fun to think of him as like this weird little kid who had an obsession with Vincent Price or Bela Lugosi or whomever, and like loved watching him and imagining this dark, weird world. And I think it like kind of gets into like kind of what makes Tim Burton fun. It's not as funny as his later stuff would do. It really loves the smell of its own farts to a regard. But I do think it really works, and it's cool that these two executives had so much faith in him and let him make a short like this, especially of his interest. I think it shows, how much promise that style had, how much promise he had as a young man, and what he could really do as a storyteller, because this is very much, he picked a perspective, he told a story, and he really did it well in a unique way. It probably doesn't feel as unique because we're watching it now when we've seen countless Tim Burton movies. But, I sort of remember this on a Frankenweenie VHS. I don't know if I'm right about that or not. But I don't know. I like its originality. I like how different it is. But I like, a really dramatic, goth little kid obsessed with Vincent Price is, perfect for Tim Burton. But it's also kind of like a deliciously fun, pretentious, but in the laugh, that you laugh about way. That I think Tim Burton would better accentuate later. But you still can't you can't not fall in love with this kid and like his Vincent Price obsession.